Chris Lee and Blake Lovell of Southeastern 14 here to talk a little baseball. Today we will preview the Vanderbilt Commodores, maybe the most disappointing team in the SEC last year. Consensus top 5 preseason. The Commodores don't make it out of the Corvallis Regional where they were finalists, losing to Oregon State. Not a great offensive team a year ago. Some key bats gone from that team, but Blake, as always, the Commodores have got some pitching.
They got some pitching, and it's I think going to be a lot of fun to watch that this season, given just the depth they have there, and obviously once again I think that'll be a big strength for this team. No surprise, as you said, in the Tim Corbin era, to have some pretty good pitchers there, and when you kind of just look at everything else, I think is, and I don't want to say it's like a huge question mark, but like I think you look at how they produce runs and those kind of things, and obviously add some talented additions to the roster, I think, that are going to help in that regard. But yeah, I mean, this is a team that again, we could do an entire preview just on the pitching, and kind of just talk about how that's going to win them a lot of games. I mean, this is a team that can win a lot of 1-0, 2-1 games, it seems like, because they just are going to have the strength there, and then just the overall depth from inning 1 to inning 9. When you look at the starters, the closers, like the relief, like they've got so much there to work with, I think. And so it's going to be very interesting to see, like I said, just how the bats come along. But I mean, again, the pitching is something else when you just look at it heading into the season on paper. So,
yeah, Vanderbilt's got something Vanderbilt nearly always has, but did not have last year. That's a Friday night ace in Carter Holton, who's a sophomore. He's a preseason second or third team All-American, depending on where you go. He was red hot to end conference season a year ago. He will get the ball on Friday nights. Who gets the ball from there? I'm not really sure. They've got a lot of guys, though, Blake, that have been stretched out before. They're going to be very left-handed heavy, potentially, in the rotation. I think Hunter Owen, who got hurt a year ago, very talented kid, could be in the weekend rotation. Devin Futrell, who was their midweek guy, threw a complete game for them in a midweek a year ago. Control specialist, not overpowering with the fastball. He'll be in the mix, I think. I don't know if that'll be weekend or if that'll be weekday. You got Sam Hlaboki, who last pitched 2 years ago, who was really good his true freshman year in 2020, had arm problems in 2021, just didn't look the same. But he's another guy that throws strikes. You got Andrew Dukanich, who was maybe the top guy to get through the draft, top arm. He'll be a factor in there somewhere, upper 90s fastball. I don't know where this all settles. Nick Maldonado in there too, who's closed for them. He started for them. He'll be healthier this year. That's going to be a theme for this staff, Blake, is experience and health. And whatever doesn't start in the rotation is going to wind up in the bullpen. And the thought is their bullpen, wherever that settles, will be one of the best in the country. And their rotation will probably be up there too.
yeah, and I think that's where, like you said, it's the unknowns of obviously bringing in a freshman guy, Dukanich, but like you said, I mean, you just look at the talent that's there and the arm that he has, and I don't think you have a lot of questions about him fitting into the mix somewhere. And you talked about Hlaboki coming back from injury. I'm very curious just to kind of watch that, because I mean, you mentioned, I mean, I think we were talking about him, whenever he before the injury. It's just like you look at the skill set and the talent that's there, and but then you mentioned Maldonado, and it's just you go up and down the line again. Just the depth overall in the pitching is something, but it starts where you started, like right. It starts with Carter Holton, and having a guy like that to kick off a series, and just to have a guy, again that can do all the things he can do. That's the starting point you need, and we know how important that is, especially once you get into the SEC series. And I mean, having that again is just going to be the strength of this team. And I'm just curious, just like you are, just to see how this rotation lines up in terms of who's starting Saturday, who's starting Sunday, who are the guys that are in this position or that position. But I think just having that, the back end talent, especially when you get into some of these games, and you go beyond just the starting pitching, they've just got a lot of options, I feel like, to work with on this team. And they're going to be banking on, like we said, some guys that are returning, a new guy into Dukanich and guys like that. But I mean, this is all we have to go on, right? We say this about every team. All we have to go on is what we see on paper coming into the season. And it's just hard to ignore that this is going to be one of the best staffs out there just based on the talents that's there.
Well, and to prove your point, there's some names we haven't gotten to that are also worth mentioning. Like a year ago, Patrick Riley was getting middle of the first round, maybe top half of the first round projections for the 2023 draft. I don't think that's going to happen. He just can't throw strikes consistently, but the fastball is elite in terms of stuff. He's going to factor in somewhere and throw, I think, some big innings for them. Bryce Cunningham was in the rotation on the weekends a year ago, some as a freshman. He throws strikes. You got Michael Doolin, who hasn't pitched in 2 years, but was a very highly rated recruit in 2020. You got Jack Anderson, who threw some innings for them. And then you got Thomas Schultz, who was pretty much a lock-it-down closer for them almost all of last year. I don't know if it'll be him or Maldonado or both on the back end, but I mean, what is that we mentioned? 12, 13 arms at this point? And I know they got some other freshmen in there too that'll throw some pitches that we're not even getting into.
You're covering all your bases, like from a situational standpoint. You feel like in any sort of situation you find yourself in a game, you need to turn to a certain guy. Like they have the options to do that, and I think just the balance they're going to have there, and again having the ace and Carter Holton, and the closing group, and just I mean that's look, we're not saying anything that if you've already kind of looked at this team heading this season you don't already know, but like this is going to be the strength of this Vanderbilt team is just to to see how far the pitching can take him on one end, but also to see the lineup itself and kind of what that looks like heading into the season.
Yeah, and this is, I don't mean to be flippant, but but wait, there's more, right? Because there's two other names I forgot. Ryan Ginther, who's a lefty, who I think will be like a big, maybe seventh inning guy for them, throws a lot of strikes. And then they got Grayson Carter, and I saw them in fall ball a little bit. I saw their scrimmages, saw him throw 101. I don't know, the strike throwing and the pitch mix is going to be maybe an issue, but when you get it up there at 101, if you're in the ballpark with the other
get
stuff,
it around the plate, you're
right,
gonna be okay at 101,
right,
I think.
right.
So,
or maybe sometimes a little bit in the other batter's box. Sometimes it
yeah.
works that way. But anyway, I mean, point being they got arms. Now the problem is offense. You start with Enrique Bradfield Jr., who's the fastest guy in the country. Didn't get caught stealing last year, in what he was successful 46 times, which is crazy. Started to show a little bit of pop. He's a first rounder. You got RJ Schreck, who transferred from Duke. He was a preseason All-American a year ago. I think he was a little bit hurt. That gives them a power bat on the corner outfield. Parker Nolan hit better towards the end of the season. He'll start somewhere. I think I can name the guys for the most part they're going to start for them. Probably Davis Diaz, probably Jonathan Vastine. But, boy, they got a lot of guys that have not proven it in the SEC. So I really don't know how they're going to field or how they're going to hit. I mean, look, you always bet on Tim Corbin to figure it out. They always have talent, but there are more question marks around this lineup than we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, and that's I think that's what I said earlier. I think you're going to see, especially maybe early, and obviously depending on how it develops as you get into the SEC, get into SEC play. But it's just I think you're going to see a lot of these low scoring type games because I look around right now, and again we know how this works every year. There's going to be a guy that all of a sudden just pops off and can certainly take a big step forward that maybe I'm not going to say you're not expecting, but one of these guys will take a step forward and maybe be a little bit more than people are giving them credit for heading into the season. But yeah, like when you just go up and down the lineup, having a guy in Bradfield who has the speed that he has can certainly make things easier, to produce runs just because you do have someone like that who can get on base and all of a sudden he's scoring, it's just, I think that can certainly, they have to have that, right? I mean, if you take that aspect away on this team, then you're really like, oh man, like where is that production going to come from? So having that is a good start. I'm very curious to see how Shrek looks. Like you said, someone who is older and they've got, I guess what, they've got some older guys here. It's just the unproven nature specifically in this lineup of kind of seeing how some of these guys are going to produce. But I'm curious to see, with him, someone who can come over and maybe give them a little more power and obviously, produce some runs as well. But yeah, it's just, as a whole, you look at this lineup and like, especially, talk about the fielding aspect too. And those kind of things. I mean, there are a lot of unknowns. And I think that, for this team, probably going into the season, I think they're probably projected, but I mean, obviously they're projected behind teams like LSU, Tennessee, um, probably Ole Miss,
Yeah.
Arkansas, A&M, teams like that. But they're not. It's not that far behind because I think of the strength that we just talked about with the pitching. But I think that's it. Like that's the storyline coming into the season is how they're able to put runs on the board. I think the fielding questions, those kind of things, like those are all valid. And I think how that progresses, and we'll find that out early. Obviously can't until you actually get into SEC competition, you can't maybe realize the full potential. But I think you'll find out very early when we get into the start of the season, kind of how this lineup's going to adjust and some of the guys that maybe could be a bit more, surprising and maybe in a good way than you think right now. But yeah, it's just I can't say I have a great feel for what this is going to look like because, like you said, it's just sort of the unproven nature of the lineup as a whole. I think.
Well, a couple other names I forgot to mention. Jack Bolger, who I would presume would be their catcher or maybe DH. He was very highly regarded coming out of high school a couple years ago. Could have gone to the draft last year, probably did not. He'll hit for them some. He'll be a top half of the league catcher, maybe top third of the league. And then they've got Calvin Hewitt, who plays some corner outfield for them, who last year his slash line was 329, 437, 494 in part-time duty. So that's an option they've got in the outfield. It's just is going to be how they hit and where does the fielding come together. RJ Austin will probably play for them some as a true freshman, maybe start at first, but it is not the Vandy lineup you are used to seeing in terms of names going in and proven track records. Not to say that they can hit or won't hit, but we just as we do this first day of February, we just don't know. Now, Blake, the schedule.
Hmm.
I think they've got the most interesting schedule in the league, if you include the non-conference portion. They go, they play out in Texas. They play TCU, Oklahoma State, Texas the first weekend. They come home. They've got a series with UCLA, 3-game series the next weekend. They go to Minnesota where they've got Nebraska, Maryland, Minnesota, and then they've got Loyola Marymount, which won't be a pushover usually, their last series. The teams they don't play, I think they catch a little bit of a break in the conference schedule. They don't play LSU, A&M, and Auburn.
Yeah.
But that's going to be, when they're all said and done, that's going to be a top 5 strength of schedule in the country, given that they just don't have a lot of pass outs. They don't have any pass outs on the weekend.
Yeah, I think what we talked to in the interview we did with Nick Mingione, Kentucky's coach, he talked about their non-conference schedule, and I think if you look at it, I think it was D1 that had the stat on it. Like these two are the top two just from a non-conference standpoint. When you look at Kentucky and Vanderbilt schedules, based on the opponent RPI and all that, again on paper coming into the season. So, yeah, I mean it's and that's why I said a minute ago, like you'll find out early because again the first 3 games, TCU, Oklahoma State, Texas, then they got that series against UCLA a week later. We'll find out, right? Like, I mean, what things are going to look like from the start against some quality competition, and then there's some other games in there as you mentioned. Start off SEC play against Ole Miss, the defending national champion, but luckily, I guess that's in Nashville, right? So that's maybe another minor break you can get in the schedule, but nonetheless, I mean, yeah, it's not an easy one, and again, that's where you still got to go to Knoxville. You've got games like that in there. You got to go to Florida, Mississippi State. Yeah, man, it's just I'm just I feel like I don't want to be too pessimistic, but it's like I feel like you're like on opposite ends here when you look at this team where you're like, man, I am so guaranteed 100% confident in what the pitching's going to be. But then on the other end, it's like, boy, I really don't know where exactly to slot this team because I don't know what we're going to get just yet out of the lineup as a whole. And so I think it's kind of an interesting spot for this Vanderbilt team to be in heading into the season. Again, knowing the league that they play in, but probably not the worst thing in the world to have this kind of schedule to start off, because it will kind of, I think, present some glaring positives, perhaps some glaring negatives, just about where this team's going to be and maybe how they're going to have to win games, just based on how the way the lineup is constructed. So,
All right, I think I'm going to tie it up for you, but because it is an interesting and kind of strange team for Vanderbilt. I would put it this way: if you look at just stats last year and what they've got coming back, and start comparing it across the league, you might be able to make a case that this is a bottom half of the league team. And look, you can be be bottom half of the league
and
and
still be,
still top
yeah,
25.
yeah,
Uh, if you consider who's running the program, if you
right,
consider that last year their Pythag record was better than their actual in terms of conference play, even with that obliteration that LSU did to them at the end. If you consider who's coaching the program, how they recruit, and where they've been, because other than Florida State, they've got the longest streak in the country of NCAA tournament appearances. If it just, I think here's the best way to put it: where you stand on them is, do you weigh more towards the numbers of what those guys put up last year, and they're not capable of much better, which I don't know that I endorse that view. I'm just going to throw it out there, though. Or do you look towards their history and track record and who's leading them and say their history for figuring it out is pretty good?
that aspect of the Tim Corbin effect, plus I think the fact that the pitching is going to carry them very, very far, even in games where they may struggle in other aspects. I think you combine those two together, like you said, they may still be a bottom half team, but they may still be the 10th or 12th best team in the country, even at that point. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's always important to remember the league we're talking about. And you can say, well, they may be the whatever third best team in the East, but that may mean they're the 11th best team in the country. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's all that, like you said, it's the trust in what they've put together over the years, and you trust, I think, that they will figure it out by the time they get to the point where they need to figure it out. And again, you can compare it to the 2019 and 2021, like you can compare it to different teams, but every team's different. Like you said, it's there's probably, I think, this team is interesting, just the way it is constructed, because maybe we do have a little more questions with the lineup than perhaps in some of those previous seasons, of course. But I still look at the pitching and I feel like they are going to be just fine, just based on the fact that they may win some lower scoring games, but it's just they've got so many options there that it's hard not to just be wowed by what they could possibly do in some of these games, even against some of the stronger offensive teams elsewhere. So,
Yeah, and we're doing this February 1st. So some pieces will settle into place between now and the season. So you may see this, and some of this may be a little bit out of date. But anyway, we plan to preview all 14 SEC baseball teams before the season. We will be here for you to cover it wall to wall during the year. Best way to get all that, hit that subscribe button. We are covering hoops wall to wall. We are in the middle of finishing up our series of SEC football previews for 2023. A lot of stuff to happen between now and then, but the appetite for SEC football is never ending. We're here to field or to feed that. Maybe
got more
field it
baseball
too.
interviews coming too. So,
Yes,
got
we
some
we
more
have another
coaches hopping
SEC
on.
baseball
Yep.
coach. Yeah, another SEC baseball coach lined up after Nick Mingione. Anyway, best way to catch all that, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button too, if you don't mind. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. We're Southeastern 14. We'll see you soon.